Stoicism, the ancient antidote to anxiety and depression, complete guide. The silent epidemic. Imagine waking up at 3 a.m., your heart racing, your mind spiraling through an endless loop of worries about tomorrow. Next week, next year, your chest feels tight, like an invisible weight is pressing down on you, making each breath feel like a conscious effort. You reach for your phone, desperate for distraction, only to find yourself scrolling through social media, comparing your life to carefully curated highlights of others, sinking deeper into that familiar pit of inadequacy and despair. If this sounds like you, you're not alone. In fact, you're part of a silent epidemic that's sweeping across the modern world. Right now, as you're watching this, over 280 million people worldwide are battling depression. Another 301 million are wrestling with anxiety disorders. That's nearly 600 million human beings, almost twice the population of the United States, trapped in cycles of mental suffering, many of them believing there's no way out. But here's what they don't teach you in school, what pharmaceutical companies don't want you to know, and what most therapists might never tell you. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a group of ancient philosophers discovered a systematic approach to mental resilience that's so powerful, so practical, and so universally applicable that it helped a slave become one of history's most influential teachers, guided a Roman emperor through plague and war while maintaining inner peace, and has secretly been the backbone of cognitive behavioral therapy, the most scientifically validated form of modern psychotherapy. This ancient system is called Stoicism, and today I'm going to show you exactly how to use it to break free from the prison of anxiety and depression that's holding you hostage. But before you click away, thinking this is just another self-help video filled with empty platitudes and toxic positivity, let me be crystal clear about something. This isn't about suppressing your emotions, becoming a robot, or pretending everything is fine when it's not. Real Stoicism, not the watered-down version you might have heard about, is about developing an unshakable inner fortress of peace while still being fully human, fully present, and fully alive. The modern mental health crisis. Let's talk about the elephant in the room that nobody wants to address. We're living in the most technologically advanced, medically sophisticated, and materially abundant era in human history. Yet we're more anxious, more depressed, and more mentally fragile than ever before.
How is this possible?
How can we have smartphones that connect us instantly to billions of people, yet feel more isolated than ever? How can we have access to more information than all previous generations combined, yet feel more confused and overwhelmed about how to live? The statistics are staggering, and they're getting worse every single year. Suicide rates have increased by 30% in the last 2 decades. Antidepressant use has skyrocketed by 400% since the 1990s. 1 in 5 adults now take some form of psychiatric medication. Among young people, the situation is even more dire. Anxiety and depression rates among teenagers have increased by more than 50% in just the last decade. We're witnessing a mental health apocalypse in slow motion, and the traditional solutions aren't working. You've probably tried some of them yourself. Maybe you've been to therapy, talking in circles about your childhood while your problems remain unsolved. Maybe you've tried medication, only to find yourself dealing with side effects that are sometimes worse than the original problem, or discovering that the relief is temporary and comes with the price of emotional numbness. Maybe you've attempted positive thinking, gratitude journals, or manifestation, only to feel like you're lying to yourself while the darkness still lurks beneath the surface. The reason these approaches often fail isn't because they're completely wrong. It's because they're incomplete. They treat symptoms without addressing the root cause. They focus on changing how you feel without changing how you think. They try to eliminate suffering without teaching you how to transform it into strength. This is where Stoicism offers something radically different. Not a band-aid for your emotional wounds, but a complete reconstruction of your mental operating system. The Stoic revolution. Picture this scene: Rome, 161 AD. The most powerful man in the known world sits in his military tent on the frozen banks of the Danube River. Outside, barbarian tribes mass for attack. Inside, plague ravages his army. His beloved wife has just died. His son is showing signs of the madness that will one day consume him. By every measure, Marcus Aurelius should be paralyzed by anxiety about the future and crushed by depression about his circumstances. Yet here he sits, calmly writing in his journal, producing words that would become one of history's most powerful guides to inner peace. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, he writes by candlelight, the screams of dying soldiers echoing in the distance. This wasn't toxic positivity. This wasn't denial. This was Stoicism in action, a philosophy so practical, so powerful, that it allowed a man facing unimaginable external chaos to maintain perfect internal order. And here's the incredible part. The exact same principles that helped Marcus Aurelius navigate the collapse of an empire can help you navigate the chaos of modern life. But Stoicism didn't begin with emperors. It started with a merchant named Zeno who lost everything in a shipwreck. Washing up on the shores of Athens, financially ruined and emotionally devastated, Zeno could have surrendered to despair. Instead, he discovered philosophy and realized something profound. He had been enslaved to external things his entire life, to money, to status, to the opinions of others. The shipwreck hadn't ruined him. It had freed him. This revelation became the foundation of Stoic philosophy. True freedom comes not from controlling the external world, but from mastering your internal response to it. The dichotomy of control. Now, I'm about to share with you the single most powerful concept in all of Stoicism, the one idea that, if truly understood and applied, can literally end your anxiety overnight. It's called the Dichotomy of Control, and it was best articulated by Epictetus, a man who understood powerlessness better than anyone. He spent the first 30 years of his life as a slave. Some things are within our power, while others are not, Epictetus taught his students. It sounds simple, almost insultingly obvious. But pause for a moment and really think about how you spend your mental energy. How much time do you waste worrying about things completely outside your control? The weather, the economy, what other people think of you, whether your boss will promote you, whether that person will text you back, whether your parents will ever understand you, whether you'll get cancer, whether there will be war, whether artificial intelligence will take your job. Your anxiety exists in direct proportion to how much mental energy you invest in things outside your control. Every moment you spend worrying about external events is a moment you're giving away your power, becoming a slave to circumstances, allowing the random chaos of the universe to dictate your inner state. This isn't just philosophically problematic, it's neurologically destructive. When you constantly worry about uncontrollable events, you're literally training your brain's threat detection system to be hyperactive, creating neural pathways that make anxiety your default state. But here's where it gets interesting. The Stoics identified exactly what is in your control, and the list is surprisingly short but infinitely powerful. Your judgments, your decisions, your responses, your values, your efforts, and your will. That's it. Everything else, and I mean everything else, is ultimately outside your direct control. Your health? You can influence it through your choices, but you can't control whether you get sick. Your relationships? You can control how you treat others, but not how they treat you. Your career? You can control your work ethic, but not whether you get hired or fired. Your reputation? You can control your actions, but not how others interpret them. This might sound depressing at first, like the Stoics are telling you that you're powerless. But it's exactly the opposite. They're showing you where your true power lies. When you stop wasting energy on the uncontrollable and redirect it toward what you can actually influence, something magical happens. Your anxiety begins to dissolve because anxiety is just misdirected energy. It's your mind trying to control the uncontrollable. Your depression starts to lift because depression often comes from feeling helpless. And now you're clearly seeing where you have agency. The stories we tell ourselves. Let me tell you about a woman named Sarah. She came to me 3 years ago, crippled by social anxiety so severe she hadn't left her apartment in 6 months, except for absolute necessities. Every social interaction felt like walking through a minefield. A simple trip to the grocery store would trigger panic attacks. She was convinced that everyone was judging her, laughing at her, thinking she was weird or stupid or worthless. Traditional therapy had told her to challenge these negative thoughts with positive ones, but trying to convince herself that people liked her when her brain was screaming. The opposite just made her feel like a fraud. Medication had taken the edge off, but also took the edge off everything else. She felt like she was living life through a thick glass wall, present, but not really there. Then we introduced Stoic principles, starting with this fundamental insight from Marcus Aurelius. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is perspective, not truth. Sarah's breakthrough came when she realized that her social anxiety wasn't really about other people at all. It was about the stories she was telling herself about what other people were thinking. She had no actual access to other people's thoughts. She was creating elaborate fiction in her mind and then responding to that fiction as if it were reality. The person who glanced at her in the store wasn't thinking she was weird. That was her story. The group that laughed as she walked by wasn't laughing at her. That was her interpretation. The Stoics call this the discipline of perception, and it's the second pillar of their system for defeating anxiety and depression. You see, external events are neutral. They have no inherent meaning. A rainy day isn't good or bad. It's just water falling from the sky. Getting fired isn't a catastrophe or an opportunity. It's just a change in employment status. Someone not texting you back isn't rejection or indifference. It's just an absence of a text message. The meaning comes from the story you tell yourself about the event. This is why two people can experience the exact same situation and have completely opposite responses. One person gets diagnosed with cancer and falls into despair, seeing it as a death sentence, the end of everything. Another person gets the same diagnosis and feels strangely liberated, suddenly clear about what really matters, grateful for every remaining moment. Same event, different story, completely different internal experience. The power of negative visualization. Now, what I'm about to share with you might seem counterintuitive, especially if you've been taught that the key to happiness is positive thinking. The Stoics had a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Basically, they would deliberately imagine losing everything they valued. They would visualize their loved ones dying, their wealth disappearing, their health failing, their reputation being destroyed. Wait, you might be thinking, isn't that exactly what anxiety is? Isn't that catastrophic thinking? No, and the difference is crucial. Anxiety is involuntary mental chaos, your mind randomly throwing worst-case scenarios at you when you're trying to sleep or enjoy your life. Negative visualization is voluntary mental training, deliberately confronting your fears in a controlled way to build resilience and perspective. Here's how Marcus Aurelius practiced it. Every morning, he would remind himself that the people he would meet that day might be difficult, ungrateful, dishonest, or cruel. Not because he was pessimistic, but because he was realistic. By mentally preparing for difficulty, he inoculated himself against disappointment and frustration. When someone actually was difficult, he wasn't thrown off balance. He had already practiced his response, but negative visualization goes deeper than just preparation. It's actually a powerful antidote to both anxiety and depression. Here's why. Anxiety often comes from fear of loss, losing your job, your relationship, your health, your life. By deliberately imagining these losses and realizing you could survive them, you rob them of their power over you. You realize that even your worst-case scenario is manageable. Depression, on the other hand, often involves taking good things for granted, feeling like nothing matters, losing the ability to appreciate what you have. Negative visualization reawakens gratitude by reminding you that everything you have is temporary and could be lost at any moment. When you imagine losing your eyesight, suddenly being able to see becomes miraculous again. When you imagine losing your loved ones, their presence becomes precious again. I'll give you a personal example. Every night before I go to sleep, I spend 5 minutes imagining that this was my last day on earth. I visualize my death, not in a morbid way, but matter-of-factly. I imagine what I would regret not saying, not doing, not appreciating. Then I open my eyes and realize I've been given another day. The relief and gratitude I feel in that moment is more powerful than any antidepressant I've ever heard of. The discipline of action knowledge, without action, is just intellectual entertainment. You can understand Stoic principles perfectly and still be miserable if you don't actually apply them. This is where the third pillar of Stoicism comes in, the discipline of action. The Stoics weren't armchair philosophers. They were warriors, emperors, slaves, and merchants who had to apply their philosophy in the real world under real pressure, with real consequences. The discipline of action starts with understanding your role in the cosmic city, as Marcus Aurelius called it. You're not just an isolated individual struggling with your own problems. You're part of an interconnected whole, with responsibilities to yourself and others. Depression often involves withdrawal, isolation, feeling disconnected from meaning and purpose. The Stoic solution isn't to focus on feeling better, but on acting better, regardless of how you feel. This is where Stoicism diverges radically from modern self-help culture. We're constantly told to follow our passion, do what makes us happy, listen to our feelings. The Stoics would say this is backwards. Feelings are unreliable guides to action. Waiting to feel motivated before you act is like waiting for the wind to blow in the right direction before you set sail. Instead, act according to virtue, courage, justice, wisdom, and self-discipline, and let the feelings follow. Take James, a client who had been unemployed for 2 years, spiraling deeper into depression with each rejection. He would wake up each day promising himself he'd send out resumes, but the fear of rejection and the weight of depression would keep him in bed, scrolling through his phone, hating himself for his weakness, which made the depression worse, which made it even harder to act, a vicious cycle that millions of people know all too well. We introduced the Stoic concept of the heroic action. Every day, regardless of how he felt, James had to perform one action that his best self would be proud of. Not a huge action. The Stoics understood that sustainable change comes from small, consistent steps, not dramatic gestures. Maybe it was sending one email, making one phone call, taking one shower. The action itself was less important than the act of choosing to act, despite his feelings. Here's what happened. The first few days were brutal. Every fiber of his being resisted. His depression told him it was pointless. His anxiety told him he would just face more rejection. But he did it anyway, and something shifted. Not his feelings. Those remained dark for weeks. But his relationship with his feelings changed. He realized he could act despite them. He wasn't their slave anymore. Within a month, those single daily actions had compounded. One email became 5. One phone call became a conversation. One shower became a morning routine. He still felt depressed, but he was a functioning, depressed person, and that made all the difference. Within 3 months, he had a job interview. Within 6 months, he was employed. The depression didn't magically disappear, but it lost its power to control his life. The view from above, one of the most powerful Stoic exercises for defeating anxiety and depression, is something Marcus Aurelius called the view from above, close. Your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself rising up out of your body, floating above your room. You're building your city. Keep rising, above the clouds, above the atmosphere, until you can see the entire earth spinning slowly in the vast darkness of space. From this cosmic perspective, Look back down at your problems. That deadline that's keeping you up at night? It's happening on a tiny speck of dust, floating in an infinite void. That person who rejected you? They're one of 8 billion humans on one planet among trillions. That mistake you made 5 years ago that still haunts you? It's already been forgotten by the universe. This isn't about minimizing your problems or telling yourself they don't matter. It's about putting them in perspective. We suffer from what I call psychological myopia. We're so zoomed in on our immediate circumstances that we lose all sense of proportion. A minor setback feels like the end of the world. A small embarrassment feels like social death. A temporary problem feels like a permanent catastrophe. The view from above restores perspective. It reminds you that you're part of something infinitely larger than your individual concerns. It connects you to what the Stoics called sympathia, the universal connection between all things. Your anxiety and depression often come from feeling like you're alone, struggling against a hostile universe. The view from above shows you that you're not separate from the universe. You are the universe, experiencing itself subjectively through the temporary arrangement of atoms you call yourself. But here's where it gets even more powerful. The Stoics combined this cosmic perspective with what they called memento mori. Remember that you will die. Not in a morbid way, but as a reality check and motivation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." Think about it. You're going to be dead for billions of years. You were dead for billions of years before you were born. This tiny sliver of consciousness you're experiencing right now, maybe 80 years if you're lucky, is all you get. And you're spending it anxious about things that won't matter in a week. Depressed about circumstances that are already changing. Paralyzed by fear of judgments from people who will also be dead soon and forgotten forever. When you truly internalize your mortality, something profound happens. The small stuff stops mattering so much, the big stuff becomes clear. You stop waiting for permission to live. You stop postponing joy until conditions are perfect. You stop treating your life like a dress rehearsal for some future performance and realize this is the performance. The obstacle is the way. Let me tell you about Ryan Holiday, a college dropout who was struggling with anxiety and career uncertainty when he discovered a quote from Marcus Aurelius that changed his life. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This principle, that obstacles aren't barriers to the good life but the path to it, is perhaps the most counterintuitive and powerful aspect of Stoic philosophy. While everyone else is trying to avoid difficulty, eliminate problems, and create a life without challenges, the Stoics understood that adversity is not only inevitable, but essential for human flourishing. Think about it. Every strength you've developed came from resistance. Every lesson you've learned came from a mistake. Every bit of confidence you've earned came from overcoming something you thought you couldn't handle. The very qualities you're proudest of were forged in the fires of difficulty, yet we spend our lives trying to avoid the very experiences that make us stronger. Anxiety is fundamentally about avoidance, trying to prevent bad things from happening. Depression often involves giving up because obstacles seem insurmountable. But what if you completely inverted your relationship with obstacles? What if instead of seeing them as problems to avoid or reasons to quit, you saw them as opportunities to grow stronger? The Stoics had a word for this: eudaimonia, human flourishing. Not happiness in the modern sense of feeling good all the time, but the deep satisfaction that comes from developing your character through challenge. A tree that grows in a greenhouse, protected from wind, develops shallow roots and weak wood. A tree that grows on a mountainside, battered by storms, develops deep roots and strong wood. Which would you rather be? This is why comfortable lives often produce anxious, depressed people, while difficult lives often produce resilient, content people. It's not that suffering is good. Unnecessary suffering is just waste. But necessary suffering, chosen suffering, meaningful suffering transforms you in ways comfort never could. Sarah, the woman with social anxiety I mentioned earlier, discovered this principle in a powerful way. After months of avoiding social situations, she decided to invert her strategy. Instead of trying to find situations where she wouldn't feel anxious, she deliberately sought out situations that made her anxious. She joined a public speaking club. She started conversations with strangers. She put herself in exactly the situations her anxiety told her to avoid. The first few weeks were terrifying. But something interesting happened. The more she faced her fears, the less power they had. Not because the situations became less scary, but because she became more capable. She was building what the Stoics call courage, not the absence of fear, but action in the presence of fear. Her anxiety didn't disappear, but it transformed from a prison wall into a sparring partner, making her stronger with each encounter. Amor fati, love your fate. Now we come to perhaps the most radical and transformative Stoic concept. Amor fati, love of fate. This isn't resignation or passive acceptance. It's an active embrace of everything that happens to you, good or bad, as necessary for your journey. Friedrich Nietzsche, who was deeply influenced by the Stoics, put it this way: "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different. Not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it. This is the ultimate cure for both anxiety and depression." Anxiety says, "This shouldn't be happening." Depression says, "I can't handle what's happening." Amor fati says, "This is exactly what should be happening, because it is happening. And I will find a way to use it." Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. Thomas Edison's laboratory burned down in 1914, destroying years of work and millions of dollars in equipment. Edison was 67 years old. Most people would have been devastated, depressed, ready to give up. Edison's response? He reportedly said to his son, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." The next morning, he was already making plans to rebuild, saying, "All our mistakes are burned up. Thank God we can start anew." This wasn't denial or toxic positivity. Edison fully acknowledged the loss, but he chose to see it as liberation rather than catastrophe. The fire had happened. That was now an unchangeable fact. He could spend the rest of his life bitter and depressed about it, or he could love it as part of his story and use it as fuel for something new. This is what amor fati looks like in practice. Your parents were abusive. That's part of your story now. You can't change it, but you can love it for making you stronger, more empathetic, more determined to break the cycle. You got fired? Perfect. You were probably getting too comfortable anyway, and now you're forced to grow. Your relationship ended. Excellent. You've been given the opportunity to discover who you are outside of that dynamic. This isn't about pretending bad things are good. It's about recognizing that the distinction between good and bad is largely a story we tell ourselves. The same event that destroys one person liberates another. The difference isn't in the event. It's in the relationship to the event. The inner Citadel Pierre Hadot, the great scholar of ancient philosophy, described the Stoic concept of the inner citadel, an impregnable fortress of peace within your own mind that no external force can breach. This isn't escapism or withdrawal from the world. It's the creation of an unshakable center from which you can engage with the world without being destroyed by it. Building your inner citadel requires daily practice. The Stoics weren't casual philosophers who thought about these ideas occasionally. They were practitioners who trained their minds with the same discipline athletes train their bodies. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations for publication. They were his private journal, his daily mental training routine. Here's a practical routine you can start tomorrow morning that combines the key Stoic practices. Wake up, and before you check your phone, before you even get out of bed, spend 5 minutes on the morning reflection. Remind yourself that you will die someday, that today could be your last day. Not to create anxiety, but to create urgency and gratitude. Then mentally prepare for the day's challenges. Visualize things going wrong, traffic, difficult people, technology failing, and see yourself responding with patience and wisdom. Throughout the day, practice the dichotomy of control. Every time you feel anxiety rising, ask yourself, is this within my control? If yes, take action. If no, let it go. This isn't a one-time decision. It's a moment-by-moment practice. You'll fail repeatedly. That's fine. Each failure is a training opportunity. When obstacles arise, practice the discipline of perception. Before you automatically label something as bad, pause and ask, is this actually bad, or is that just my interpretation? How might this be exactly what I need right now? How would the ideal version of myself respond to this? In the evening, practice the discipline of action review. The Stoics called this the evening examination. Review your day not with judgment but with curiosity. Where did you act according to virtue? Where did you fall short? What did you learn? How can you improve tomorrow? This isn't about beating yourself up, it's about continuous improvement. Before sleep, practice the view from above. Zoom out from your individual concerns and see yourself as part of the cosmic whole. Remember that in 100 years, everyone you know will be dead. In 1,000 years, you'll be forgotten. In 1 billion years, the sun will have consumed the earth. This isn't depressing, it's liberating. It means you're free to live without the weight of permanence. The modern science of ancient wisdom is something fascinating. Modern neuroscience and psychology are validating what the Stoics knew 2,000 years ago. Cognitive behavioral therapy, the most evidence-based treatment for anxiety and depression, is essentially Stoicism stripped of its philosophical context. The core CBT principle, that our emotions are caused not by events, but by our thoughts about events, comes directly from Epictetus. But the Stoics went deeper than modern therapy typically goes. They weren't just interested in feeling better, they were interested in becoming better. They understood that anxiety and depression aren't just medical conditions to be treated, but philosophical problems to be solved. They arise from fundamental errors in how we think about ourselves, our place in the universe, and what constitutes a good life. Modern research on neuroplasticity shows that the brain practices the Stoics recommended literally rewire your neural pathways. When you consistently practice the dichotomy of control, you're strengthening the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, while calming the amygdala, the fear center. When you practice negative visualization, you're activating the same neural pathways as actual loss, building resilience without having to experience actual trauma. Studies on mindfulness meditation, which shares many principles with Stoic contemplation, show dramatic reductions in anxiety and depression symptoms. But the Stoics would argue that Western mindfulness often misses the point by focusing on non-judgmental awareness without the ethical framework that gives it meaning. It's not enough to observe your thoughts. You need principles by which to evaluate and direct them. The 4 cardinal virtues. The Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues that serve as a compass for navigating life: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. These aren't abstract ideals, but practical tools for defeating anxiety and depression. Wisdom, Sophia, is seeing things as they truly are, not as your anxiety fears they might be, or as your depression convinces you they must be. It's the ability to distinguish between what's up to you and what isn't, between appearance and reality, between what matters and what doesn't. Wisdom isn't knowing everything, it's knowing the limits of your knowledge and acting accordingly. When you're anxious, you're usually not seeing clearly. You're projecting futures that don't exist, mind-reading thoughts you can't access, catastrophizing outcomes that rarely materialize. Wisdom cuts through this mental fog like a sword through smoke. It asks simple questions. What do I actually know? What am I assuming? What story am I telling myself? Justice, Dichotomy, is recognizing your connection to other human beings and acting accordingly. Depression often involves isolation, withdrawal. the feeling that you're alone in your suffering. But the Stoics understood that we're social creatures, literally designed for connection and contribution. Your mental health isn't separate from your social health. This doesn't mean you need to be an extrovert or have a huge social circle. It means recognizing that your well-being is tied to the well-being of others. When you're depressed, one of the most powerful things you can do is help someone else. Not because it makes you feel good, though it often does, but because it's aligned with your nature as a social being. It breaks the self-focused rumination that feeds depression. Courage, Andrea, isn't the absence of fear, but right action in the presence of fear. Every time you avoid something because of anxiety, you're reinforcing the neural pathways that create anxiety. Every time you act despite fear, you're building the neural pathways of courage. This isn't about being reckless. It's about distinguishing between real danger and imagined threat. Most of what your anxiety warns you about isn't actually dangerous. Social rejection won't kill you. Failure won't destroy you. Embarrassment won't end you. But your brain, running on ancient software designed for survival in prehistoric times, treats these modern challenges as life or death threats. Courage is updating your mental software to match your actual reality. Temperance, Sophrosine, is self-discipline, moderation, the ability to resist impulses that don't serve your higher goals. In our age of instant gratification, this might be the most important and most difficult virtue to cultivate. Your phone, your food, your entertainment, they're all designed to hijack your brain's reward system, creating cycles of craving and disappointment that fuel anxiety and depression. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort to build temperance. They would sleep on hard floors, fast regularly, wear rough clothing, take cold baths. Not as punishment, but as training. When you voluntarily choose discomfort, you prove to yourself that comfort isn't necessary for well-being. You break the addiction to external conditions that keeps you anxious about losing what you have and depressed about not having what you want. The Stoic paradoxes. The Stoics loved paradoxes, apparent contradictions that reveal deeper truths. Understanding these paradoxes is key to breaking free from the mental prisons of anxiety and depression. The first paradox: the only way to be happy is to stop trying to be happy. The more you chase happiness, the more it eludes you. It's like trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. The Stoics understood that happiness is a byproduct of living according to virtue, not a goal to be pursued directly. When you stop chasing happiness and start pursuing meaning, happiness tends to show up on its own. The second paradox: the only way to control your life is to give up control. The more you try to control external events, the more anxious you become, because deep down you know you can't actually control them. But when you give up the illusion of control over externals and focus on what you can actually control, your responses, you gain real power. The third paradox: the only way to avoid suffering is to accept suffering. When you resist suffering, you create what the Buddhists call the second arrow, suffering about suffering. You're not just in pain, you're upset about being in pain. You're not just sad, you're depressed about being sad. Acceptance doesn't eliminate the first arrow, but it prevents the second, third, and fourth arrows you shoot at yourself. The fourth paradox: the only way to feel secure is to accept insecurity. Security is an illusion. Everything you have can be lost. Everyone you love will die. Your body is deteriorating. Your society could collapse. Your planet is temporary. The more you try to create security, the more anxious you become about losing it. But when you fully accept the fundamental insecurity of existence, you find a strange peace. You stop wasting energy on impossible projects and start living fully in the only moment you ever have, now. Practical exercises for daily life theory. Without practice is useless. Let me give you specific exercises you can start using immediately to apply Stoic principles to your anxiety and depression. The morning preparation. Each morning, Before you engage with the world, spend 10 minutes preparing mentally. Review your day ahead and identify potential challenges. Visualize yourself handling them with wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Don't imagine everything going perfectly. Imagine things going wrong and yourself responding well. This isn't pessimism. It's mental rehearsal, the afternoon reset. Set an alarm for midday. When it goes off, stop whatever you're doing and take 5 deep breaths. Ask yourself, what am I trying to control that's outside my control? What am I avoiding that's within my control? How would the ideal version of myself handle this moment? This breaks the momentum of unconscious patterns and returns you to conscious choice. The evening review before bed. Review your day without judgment. Where did you act according to virtue? Where did you fall short? What did you learn? How can you improve tomorrow? Write this down if possible. The act of writing engages different neural pathways than just thinking, making the lessons more likely to stick. The voluntary discomfort practice. Once a week, deliberately do something uncomfortable. Take a cold shower. Skip a meal. Sleep on the floor. Walk instead of driving. The specific discomfort doesn't matter. What matters is choosing it. This builds your capacity to be okay when things aren't okay, which is the antidote to anxiety about future discomfort. The perspective exercise. When you're overwhelmed by a problem, ask yourself, will this matter in 10 years? Will this matter in 100 years? Will this matter when I'm on my deathbed? This isn't about minimizing real problems. It's about right-sizing them. Most of what causes anxiety and depression is temporarily magnified beyond its actual importance. The virtue check. When facing a decision, ask yourself, what would wisdom counsel? What would justice require? What would courage do? What would temperance advise? This transforms decision-making from an anxiety-producing analysis of endless options to a clear consultation with timeless principles. The community of reason. One of the most overlooked aspects of Stoicism is its emphasis on community. The Stoics believed in the cosmopolis, the world city of rational beings. You're not alone in your struggle with anxiety and depression. You're part of a community that stretches back thousands of years and includes some of history's greatest minds. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world, struggled with the same doubts and fears you face. Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest citizens, battled anxiety so severe he considered suicide. Epictetus, born into slavery, faced circumstances that would break most people. Yet they all found peace through the same principles available to you. But it's not just historical figures. Right now, millions of people around the world are discovering Stoicism and using it to transform their mental health. There are online communities, local groups, books, podcasts, and resources that didn't exist even a decade ago. You're joining a movement of people who refuse to accept that anxiety and depression are permanent fixtures of modern life. This matters because isolation amplifies mental suffering. When you think you're the only one struggling, your problems feel unique and unsolvable. When you realize everyone struggles and that there are proven strategies for dealing with that struggle, hope returns. Not false hope based on wishful thinking, but rational hope based on evidence and example. The Stoic response to modern challenges. Let's address the elephant in the room. Can ancient philosophy really solve modern problems? After all, the Stoics didn't have to deal with social media, 24/7 news cycles, economic uncertainty, climate change, or any of the unique stresses of contemporary life. But here's the thing, the specific challenges change, but the fundamental nature of human psychology doesn't. The same cognitive biases that caused anxiety in ancient Rome cause anxiety today. The same thinking errors that led to depression in Marcus Aurelius's time lead to depression now. The tools for addressing these issues remain remarkably consistent. Take social media, for example. The anxiety it creates comes from comparison, the fear of missing out, the addiction to validation through likes and comments. The Stoic response? Apply the dichotomy of control. You can't control how many likes you get or what others post. You can control what you post, what you consume, and how much time you spend online. You can practice temperance by limiting your usage. You can practice wisdom by recognizing that social media presents a curated, distorted view of reality. Or consider economic anxiety, fear about job loss, inflation, recession. The Stoic approach isn't to pretend these aren't real concerns. It's to clearly distinguish between what you can and can't control. You can't control the economy, but you can control your spending habits, your skill development, your work ethic. You can practice negative visualization by imagining job loss and preparing mentally and practically. You can practice amor fati by being ready to embrace whatever economic changes come as opportunities for growth. Climate anxiety is particularly interesting from a Stoic perspective. You can't individually stop climate change, but you can control your own environmental choices. You can't force others to care, but you can model sustainable behavior. You can't guarantee the future, but you can act according to virtue in the present. The Stoic isn't paralyzed by the magnitude of the problem, but does what they can, while accepting what they can't control. Breaking the medication trap, I need to address something controversial but important. I'm not anti-medication. For some people, medication is literally life-saving. But we've created a culture where medication is the first and often only response to anxiety and depression. And this is problematic for several reasons. First, medication often treats symptoms without addressing causes. It's like taking painkillers for a broken bone without setting the bone. The pain might decrease, but the underlying problem remains. Anxiety and depression are often signals that something in your life or thinking needs to change. Medicating them away without addressing the root cause is like disconnecting a smoke alarm because the noise is annoying. Second, medication can create learned helplessness. When you believe your mental health is entirely dependent on a chemical you ingest, you give away your power. You become passive in your own healing. The Stoics would argue that this is exactly backwards. Your greatest power lies in your ability to shape your own thoughts and responses. Third, medication often comes with side effects that can be worse than the original problem. Sexual dysfunction, weight gain, emotional numbness, increased suicidal ideation. These aren't rare side effects, but common ones. You might reduce your anxiety, but lose your ability to feel joy. You might lift your depression, but lose your creativity and passion. The Stoic alternative isn't to suffer nobly without help. It's to address the root causes of suffering through philosophical practice. This is harder than taking a pill, but it's also more sustainable and empowering. You're not dependent on a prescription, a doctor, or a pharmaceutical company. You're developing internal resources that no one can take away. Again, I'm not saying throw away your medication. I'm saying consider that medication might be a bridge, not a destination. Use it if you need it to stabilize enough to do the deeper work. But don't accept that you'll need it forever. Don't accept that your brain is broken and needs permanent chemical correction. The Stoics would argue that your brain is remarkably adaptable and that with the right practices, you can literally rewire it for resilience. The death of meaning, one of the root causes of modern anxiety and depression that the Stoics directly address, is the death of meaning in contemporary life. We've replaced religion with consumerism, community with social media, purpose with pleasure. We're told that life has no inherent meaning, that we're just clever apes on a rock hurtling through space, that consciousness is just an accident of evolution. Is it any wonder we're anxious and depressed? Humans are meaning-making machines. We need purpose like we need oxygen. Without it, we suffocate psychologically. The existential vacuum at the heart of modern life creates a background radiation of despair that no amount of entertainment or medication can fully address. The Stoics offer a solution: virtue as meaning. Your life has meaning to the extent that you develop wisdom, act with justice, demonstrate courage, and practice temperance. This meaning isn't dependent on external validation, religious belief, or cultural approval. It's self-evident and self-validating. When you act virtuously, you know it. When you fail to act virtuously, you know that too. This is why Marcus Aurelius, despite facing plagues, wars, and personal tragedies, never fell into nihilistic despair. He had a clear purpose: to be a good human being. Not good in the sense of nice or pleasant, but good in the sense of fulfilling his potential as a rational social being. Every day offered opportunities to practice virtue. Every challenge was a chance to grow stronger. Every interaction was an opportunity to contribute to the common good. You might think, that's fine for an emperor, but I'm just a regular person with a regular job and regular problems. But that's exactly the point. The Stoics believe that virtue is equally available to everyone, regardless of circumstances. A slave can be more virtuous than an emperor. A janitor can live with more purpose than a CEO. External status is irrelevant to internal worth. The obstacle course of life. Think of your life as an obstacle course specifically designed for your development. Every challenge you face is perfectly calibrated to teach you exactly what you need to learn. This isn't mystical thinking, it's practical philosophy. The obstacles you encounter aren't random punishments or meaningless suffering. They're training equipment for your character, your anxiety. It's teaching you about courage. Your depression, it's teaching you about resilience. Your difficult relationship, it's teaching you about patience and boundaries. Your health problems, they're teaching you about mortality and priorities. Your financial struggles, they're teaching you about what really matters. This reframe is powerful because it transforms you from a victim of circumstances to a student of life. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You ask, what is this here to teach me? Instead of resenting obstacles, you become curious about them. Instead of avoiding challenges, you engage with them as opportunities for growth. I had a client named Michael who was devastated when his business failed after 10 years. He fell into severe depression, seeing himself as a failure, waste of space, burden on his family. Traditional therapy focused on challenging these cognitive distortions and building his self-esteem back up. But it wasn't working because deep down, he believed his worth was tied to his success. When we introduced Stoic principles, everything shifted. The business failure wasn't a verdict on his worth. It was training equipment for his character. He could choose to let it make him bitter, or he could let it make him better. He chose better. He used the failure to practice resilience, to strengthen his relationships by being vulnerable, to discover what really mattered to him beyond success. Within 6 months, he had started a new venture, but more importantly, he had developed an unshakable sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on external results. The business failure, which had seemed like the worst thing that ever happened to him, became the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because it was pleasant, but because it forced him to grow in ways comfort never could have. The daily practice success with Stoicism isn't about perfect understanding or flawless execution. It's about consistent daily practice. The Stoics compared philosophy to medicine. It only works if you take it regularly. Reading about Stoicism without practicing it is like reading about exercise without working out. Intellectually interesting, but practically useless. Here's a daily practice structure that incorporates all the major Stoic exercises. Morning, 10 minutes. Wake up and before checking your phone. Practice negative visualization, 2 minutes. Review your day ahead and identify potential challenges, 3 minutes. Set your intention to act according to virtue, regardless of circumstances, 2 minutes. Practice the view from above to gain perspective, 3 minutes. Midday, 5 minutes. Stop and assess, what am I trying to control that's outside my control? 2 minutes. Reset your focus on what is in your control, 2 minutes. Recommit to virtuous action for the afternoon, 1 minute evening, 10 minutes. Review your day without judgment. Where did you act virtuously? Where did you fall short? 5 minutes. Practice gratitude for the opportunity to learn and grow. 2 minutes. Prepare mentally for tomorrow's challenges. 3 minutes weekly. 30 minutes. Choose and execute a voluntary discomfort practice. Read from a Stoic text, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. Journal about your progress and insights. This might seem like a lot, but it's only 25 minutes a day. Less time than most people spend on social media. And unlike scrolling, which often increases anxiety and depression, this practice actively builds resilience and peace. The transformation process. Let me be clear about what to expect when you begin practicing Stoicism. This isn't a quick fix or magic pill. The transformation happens in stages, and understanding these stages helps you persist when progress feels slow. Stage 1. Intellectual understanding. Weeks 1-4. You understand the concepts intellectually but struggle to apply them. You know you should focus on what's in your control, but you still catch yourself worrying about externals. This is normal. Your brain has spent years, maybe decades, running anxiety and depression programs. It takes time to install new software. Stage 2, conscious incompetence, months 2 to 3. You become acutely aware of how often you violate Stoic principles. You notice yourself catastrophizing, seeking approval, avoiding discomfort, trying to control the uncontrollable. This can be frustrating, even depressing. You might feel like you're getting worse, not better. Actually, you're just becoming conscious of patterns that were always there. Awareness is the first step to change. Stage 3, conscious competence, months 4 to 6. You start catching yourself in real time and correcting course. You feel anxiety rising and consciously apply the dichotomy of control. You notice depression creeping in and deliberately take virtuous action. It requires effort and attention, but it works. You have moments, maybe hours, of genuine peace. Stage 4, unconscious competence, months 7 to 12. The practices become habitual. You automatically reframe obstacles as opportunities. You naturally focus on what's in your control. You instinctively act according to virtue. What once required conscious effort now happens automatically. You still have anxious and depressive moments, but they're shorter, less intense, and you recover quickly. Stage 5, integration, year 2 and beyond. Stoicism becomes not something you practice, but who you are. You don't think about being stoic anymore than you think about breathing. The principles are so deeply integrated that they inform every decision, every response, every moment. You've built your inner citadel, and while storms still rage outside, inside there is unshakable peace. Common mistakes and misconceptions. Stoicism has gained popularity, it's also accumulated misunderstandings. Let me address the most common mistakes people make when applying Stoic principles to anxiety and depression. Mistake 1, emotional suppression. Stoicism is not about becoming an emotionless robot. The Stoics experienced and expressed emotions. Marcus Aurelius grieved when his children died. Seneca wrote about his struggles with anger. The goal isn't to eliminate emotions, but to not be controlled by them. Feel your feelings fully, but don't let them make your decisions. Mistake 2, passive acceptance. Accepting what you can't control doesn't mean being passive about everything. If your house is on fire, you don't just accept it. You call the fire department and grab the extinguisher. The Stoic first determines what's in their control, then takes vigorous action on those things while accepting the ultimate outcome. Mistake 3, isolated practice. While Stoicism emphasizes personal responsibility, it doesn't advocate isolation. Humans are social creatures, and the Stoics recognize this. Seeking support, building relationships, and contributing to community are all part of Stoic practice. You're responsible for your own virtue, but you develop it in relationship with others. Mistake 4, perfectionism. You will fail at Stoic practice repeatedly. You'll lose your temper, give in to anxiety, wallow in depression. Marcus Aurelius, even as emperor and advanced practitioner, wrote constantly about his own failures and the need to begin again. Stoicism isn't about perfect execution, but persistent practice. Mistake 5. Intellectual bypassing. Reading about Stoicism without practicing it is like reading cookbooks without cooking. The philosophy only works when applied. Don't get caught in endless study without implementation. Better to practice one principle imperfectly than to understand all principles perfectly without practicing any. The Stoic response to trauma. Many people with anxiety and depression have experienced trauma. The Stoic approach to trauma is nuanced and powerful, though it requires careful explanation to avoid seeming dismissive of genuine suffering. The Stoics distinguish between the event and the story about the event. The trauma happened, that's an unchangeable fact. But the meaning you make of it, the story you tell yourself about it, the identity you build around it, these are all within your control. You can't change what happened to you, but you can change what you do with what happened to you. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychologist, embodied Stoic principles when he wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. This doesn't mean minimizing trauma or pretending it doesn't affect you. It means recognizing that you have more power than you might think." Many trauma survivors get stuck in a victim identity, which, while understandable, keeps them trapped in the past. The Stoic approach is to honor the pain while refusing to let it define your future. I worked with Jennifer, a survivor of childhood abuse, who had been in therapy for years with little progress. She could tell you everything about her trauma, analyze it from every angle, but she was still crippled by anxiety and depression. When we introduced Stoic principles, she initially resisted. "You don't understand what I've been through," she said. And she was right, I didn't, but Marcus Aurelius did. Epictetus did. They had both experienced severe trauma and found a way through. The breakthrough came when she realized she was giving her abuser continued power over her life. Every day she spent anxious and depressed was another day her abuser won. This made her angry, and anger gave her energy. She started practicing Stoic exercises with fierce determination. She couldn't change her past, but she could become someone her abuser never imagined she could be: strong, resilient, at peace. Within a year, Jennifer had transformed. The trauma was still part of her story, but it no longer controlled her story. She had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and alchemized it into strength. This is the Stoic way. Not denying suffering, but transforming it into power. The ultimate choice. As we near the end of this guide, I want to leave you with the most important insight the Stoics offer. You always have a choice. No matter how severe your anxiety, how deep your depression, how traumatic your past, how difficult your present, you always have a choice in how you respond. This choice might be small at first. The choice to take one breath, read one page, try one exercise. But small choices compound. Each time you choose virtue over vice, courage over cowardice, action over paralysis, you're building momentum. You're proving to yourself that you're not helpless, not hopeless, not broken beyond repair. The Stoics believed in something called prohairesis, your faculty of choice. The one thing that's completely and utterly yours. Everything else can be taken from you. Your health, wealth, relationships, even your life. But your ability to choose your response, that's yours forever, and it's all you need. This is why Stoicism is the ultimate antidote to anxiety and depression. Anxiety says you're powerless against future threats. Stoicism shows you your power lies in your response to whatever comes. Depression says nothing you do matters. Stoicism shows you that your choices are the only things that truly matter. Your Stoic journey starts now. You've made it this far, which tells me something important about you. You're not content to remain trapped in anxiety and depression. You're looking for a way out, and you're willing to consider ancient wisdom that most people dismiss as outdated or irrelevant. This openness, this willingness to learn, is the first virtue, the beginning of wisdom. But knowledge without action is merely entertainment. You could close this guide, file it away in your mind as interesting, and go back to your habitual patterns of anxiety and depression. Or you could make a different choice. You could decide that today, right now, this moment, is when your transformation begins. Start small. Choose one Stoic practice from this guide and commit to it for the next 7 days. Maybe it's the morning reflection, taking 5 minutes each morning to prepare mentally for the day. Maybe it's the dichotomy of control, catching yourself once per day, worrying about something outside your control and redirecting that energy. Maybe it's voluntary discomfort, taking one cold shower this week to prove to yourself that comfort isn't necessary for well-being. The specific practice matters less than the act of practicing. You're building a new neural pathway, creating a new habit, becoming a new version of yourself. It will feel awkward at first, like writing with your non-dominant hand. Your brain will resist, preferring the familiar misery of anxiety and depression to the unfamiliar effort of change. This is normal. This is expected. This is the obstacle that becomes the way. The compound effect, here's what most people don't understand about personal transformation. It's not linear. You won't feel 1% better each day until you reach 100% better. Instead, progress follows a compound curve. For weeks, maybe months, you might feel like nothing is changing. Then suddenly, seemingly overnight, everything shifts. The practices that felt forced become natural. The principles that seemed abstract become obvious. The peace that seemed impossible becomes your default state. This is why persistence is crucial. Most people quit just before the breakthrough. They practice for a few weeks, don't see dramatic results, and conclude it doesn't work. They don't realize they're like someone who plants a seed, waters it for a month, sees no growth, and gives up, not knowing the roots were growing deep underground, preparing for explosive growth. Your anxiety and depression didn't develop overnight. They're the result of years, maybe decades, of habitual thought patterns. These patterns have carved deep grooves in your neural pathways. Changing them takes time and repetition. But here's the beautiful thing. The same neuroplasticity that allowed negative patterns to form allows positive patterns to form. Your brain doesn't care whether you're building anxiety or resilience. It just strengthens whatever you practice. The Stoic community, remember, you're not alone in this journey. Around the world, millions of people are discovering Stoicism and using it to transform their mental health. There are online forums, local meetup groups, book clubs, and communities dedicated to practicing these principles. Connecting with others on the same path provides support, accountability, and inspiration. But even if you practice alone, you're connected to a lineage stretching back over 2 millennia. When you practice negative visualization, you're joining Marcus Aurelius in his tent on the Danube. When you apply the dichotomy of control, you're standing with Epictetus in his classroom. When you embrace amor fati, you're walking with Nietzsche through the Swiss Alps. You're part of something larger than yourself, a tradition of humans refusing to accept that suffering is inevitable and peace is impossible. The final call to action. If you've made it through this entire guide, you've already demonstrated remarkable commitment. But reading is just the first step. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you let it remain theoretical, interesting information that doesn't change your life? Or will you apply it, test it, live it? Will you continue accepting anxiety and depression as permanent features of your existence? Or will you begin building your inner citadel brick by brick, day by day? The choice is yours, and it's a choice you'll need to make not once, but daily, hourly, moment by moment. Each time anxiety rises, you'll choose control or acceptance. Each time depression descends, you'll choose paralysis or action. Each time life challenges you, you'll choose victim or student. These choices might seem small, insignificant, hardly worth making. But the Stoics understood that character is built in moments, not monuments. The small choices you make when no one is watching, when it doesn't seem to matter, when you don't feel like it, these are the choices that determine who you become. Your first assignment is your first assignment. Should you choose to accept it, tonight, before you go to sleep, write down 3 things. One thing you're currently trying to control that's outside your control. 2. One thing within your control that you've been avoiding. 3. One small action you'll take tomorrow to practice virtue, regardless of how you feel. That's it. Simple, specific, actionable. Not a complete transformation, just a single step in the right direction. Because that's how all journeys begin, with a single step. Tomorrow, do what you wrote down. Not perfectly, just genuinely. Then tomorrow night, write down 3 more things. Repeat this for 7 days. Just 7 days. You've probably spent years in anxiety and depression. Surely you can invest 1 week in potential freedom. The promise and the warning. I need to be honest with you about both the promise and the warning of Stoic practice. The promise: if you genuinely apply these principles consistently, your relationship with anxiety and depression will fundamentally change. Not overnight, not without effort, but inevitably. You'll develop a resilience you didn't know was possible. You'll find peace in situations that previously would have destroyed you. You'll discover a sense of purpose that transcends circumstances. This isn't wishful thinking. It's the documented experience of millions of practitioners across thousands of years. The warning: this path requires you to take complete responsibility for your mental state. No more blaming circumstances, other people, your past, your genetics, or your brain chemistry. While these factors influence your experience, they don't determine your response. This level of responsibility can feel overwhelming, even terrifying. It's easier to be a victim than a victor. It's more comfortable to blame than to change. But here's the paradox. Taking total responsibility is totally liberating. When you stop waiting for external circumstances to change and start changing your internal response, you reclaim your power. When you stop being a victim of your thoughts and start being the author of them, you become free. True freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be who you choose to be, regardless of circumstances. The time is now. As I bring this guide to a close, I want to address the voice in your head that might be saying, "This sounds good, but I'm too damaged. But my situation is different. But I've tried everything. But I don't have time. But I'm not strong enough." These buts are the chains that keep you enslaved to anxiety and depression. They're the stories you tell yourself to avoid the discomfort of change. They're the excuses that keep you safe in familiar misery rather than risking unfamiliar growth. The Stoics had a phrase, memento mori, remember you will die. This isn't morbid, it's motivating. You have a limited number of days on this planet. How many more do you want to spend anxious about things you can't control? How many more do you want to waste depressed about circumstances you can change? How much more of your one precious life do you want to sacrifice to mental suffering that's largely optional? The time is now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when you feel ready. Now. Because readiness is a myth. You become ready by starting, not by waiting. You develop strength by exercising it, not by thinking about it. You build resilience by facing challenges, not by avoiding them. The living philosophy Stoicism isn't a philosophy you learn. It's a philosophy you live. It's not a set of ideas to intellectually agree with. It's a set of practices to embody daily. It's not a destination you reach. It's a path you walk. Every day you practice, you're voting for the person you want to become. Every time you apply the dichotomy of control, you're voting for peace over anxiety. Every time you embrace an obstacle, you're voting for growth over stagnation. Every time you act virtuously despite your feelings, you're voting for character over comfort. These votes add up. Not immediately, not obviously, but inevitably. One day you'll face a situation that would have previously triggered massive anxiety, and you'll respond with calm clarity. You'll encounter a loss that would have previously plunged you into depression, and you'll meet it with acceptance and even gratitude. You'll look back at who you used to be and barely recognize that anxious, depressed person, because you've become someone else entirely. Someone stronger, wiser, more at peace. Subscribe and begin. If this guide has resonated with you, if you feel that spark of possibility, that whisper of hope that maybe, just maybe, there's a way out of the mental prison you've been living in, then take action right now. Don't let this moment pass. Don't let inspiration fade into procrastination. Subscribe to this channel for more practical wisdom on applying Stoic principles to modern life. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos that could change your life. Share this with someone you know who's struggling with anxiety or depression. You might be the reason they find their way to freedom. But most importantly, commit to practicing what you've learned. Knowledge without action is impotent. Philosophy without practice is pointless. You now have the tools, ancient, proven, powerful tools, to build a life of resilience, purpose, and peace. The question is, will you use them? The Stoics await your answer. More importantly, your future self awaits your answer. The version of you that's free from anxiety, liberated from depression, at peace with life, exactly as it is while working to make it better. That version of you is possible. Not probable, but possible. The difference between probability and actuality is your choice, your effort, your commitment to the practice. The final words Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations, never intending them to be read by others. They were his private journal, his personal reminders, his way of staying true to Stoic principles while managing an empire in crisis. Yet these private thoughts have provided guidance and comfort to millions across centuries. Why? Because the struggles he faced are universal. The solutions he found are timeless. The practices he developed work regardless of era, culture, or circumstance. The same wisdom that helped him navigate war and plague can help you navigate work stress and relationship problems. The same principles that gave him peace while watching his empire crumble can give you peace while facing your own challenges. You don't need to be an emperor to practice Stoicism. You don't need to be a philosopher to understand it. You don't need to be strong to begin. You just need to be willing to question your thoughts, willing to challenge your patterns, willing to take responsibility for your responses, willing to practice even when you don't feel like it. Your anxiety wants you to close this guide and go back to worrying. Your depression wants you to dismiss this as another failed attempt at feeling better. But there's another voice, quieter but truer, that knows you're capable of change, that knows you deserve peace, that knows you have within you everything you need to build an extraordinary life, regardless of ordinary circumstances. Listen to that voice. Trust that voice. Act on that voice. Your Stoic journey begins now. Not with perfection, but with practice. Not with certainty, but with courage. Not with the absence of anxiety and depression, but with the presence of tools to transform them. Remember, the obstacle is the way. The struggle is the teacher. The challenge is the opportunity. And you, anxious, depressed, struggling you, have everything you need to become the peaceful, purposeful, powerful person you're meant to be. Welcome to Stoicism. Welcome to freedom. Welcome to the rest of your life. The ancient antidote to modern suffering is now in your hands. Use it wisely. Use it daily. Use it to become who you truly are, beneath the anxiety, beyond the depression, above the circumstances. Your inner citadel awaits construction. Begin building today. Like this video if it provided value. Subscribe for more practical philosophy. Share with someone who needs this message. But most importantly, practice what you've learned. Because in the end, the only philosophy that matters is the philosophy you live.